let's start the Novice Grand Finals, calling on the Prime Minister to begin the debate. Here, here.
All right, checking if I'm clearly audible.
Yep, you are.
All right, cool. For POIs, just unmute. Going to start my speech in three, two, one. I think first of all, before we start this debate, I think we need to look into the motion and see how does these iPad kids looks like. I think they are still in their early stage of life, being children, might be 3 to 5 to 8. And I think they are exposed to excessive screen time in this motion. I think the keyword here is excessive. So in this motion, we are not debating about whether we agree or not with children using technologies. We support the use of technologies, but then we think it's questionable to the point that if you let these children use these technologies excessively and expose them to massive screen time, and that is bad, right? But then firstly, let's look into the reasons why do we think parents raise iPad kids, right? I think the reasons is they think they don't have enough time to parent their children because, maybe due to perceived busyness, like how they think like they are too busy, they have too much thing on their hands, hence they try to find a distraction for their children. And second, I think they also think that, being in touch with your kid, giving them attention and care is not very important at all. Hence, it's just give them iPad so that your kids shut up. We think this is very bad and we want to avoid it at all costs, right? But then thirdly, I think we also need to talk about what is the most likely way this shaming looks like, right? Because I think it only looks like two things. One, there is social disapproval, like criticisms through social media or real life towards the parents immediately. But we think that it will not escalate into harassment, due to existence of law and social norms, boundaries on to what degree a shaming is still generally acceptable, right? But second, we also think that it will looks like there is this widespread narrative that this kind of parenting is bad, and as a side effect, there is more support for parenting styles which promotes better parent and children relationship. But then, yeah, I think two main argumentations on why we support the motion. I think firstly, notice how that this kind of parenting harms the children excessively, right? Why so? I think several reasons. One, there is this excessive exposure towards screen, which brings potential harm to the children, either directly through, eye issues because due to high blue light exposure, or indirectly due to the lack of interpersonal skills on these children due to less real social interaction with other humans. I think this is especially true then because notice that parents are the only humans who are interacting with the children most of the time in the early stage of humanhood, right? But then second, I don't think this also looks like psychological or mental issues such as loneliness because parents replace children attachment to them with iPad, right? And it might lead to detachment issues when these children grow up. I think this is something primal and instinctive within human condition when you try to keep attached to your parents and your parents basically just replace themselves with iPad, making you attached to the iPad instead. But then second, I think this also makes the children lack emotional expression because notice that and notice that emotional expression is something exclusively achieved when you have direct interaction with another humans, and in this case through parenting where the children interact directly with their parents, right? Where they sometimes they cry, sometimes they wail, sometimes they smile, sometimes they bring curious or etc. But notice that this is something that is natural to humans. The moment you replace humans interactions or parental care with excessive iPad use, you basically don't let your children or don't give them any reasons to express themselves emotionally, and we think this is harmful for a human. But I think I'll take that POI.
Okay, so in the cases where parents really don't care and that is why iPad kids occur, why is it they'll be any more receptive to societal shaming?
That's my second argument, by the way. Moving on to the importance of my first argument, then. I think this argumentation on children's harms are very important because of two things. I think one, children's are the vulnerable actor here, and we have proven to you why they are actively harmed. But then second, we also look into parents' obligation in here, right? Parents have the obligation to not harm their children in any way because of two reasons. I think first, the fact that they are the child summoner, i.e. the child never asked to be born to begin with, is that parents I think their whim that they want to summon this child through a procreation. But then second, I think there's also this safeguarding principle where parents are supposed to protect their children as the reasonable and consenting adult. And the fact that you do iPad parenting and harm them means that you fail these principles. I think these moral frameworks also already give us justifications for society to shame these parents when they fail these principles regardless of the outcome, right? But then second, then I think this shaming is necessary to stop this kind of parenting, right? Because of several reasons. I think one, parents in the current status quo, parent tends to be negligent towards what right parenting looks like due to several reasons. The reasons why we think this is true then, because look, in the current status quo, we have many researchers shows that children need attention, or there are many parenting contents that which has existed in social media as well, or even social customs and traditions on family value, on that how parents should care about their children, which exists especially in Asian communities. And the fact that these all facts or educations, you call it, is not working to teach this kind of parenting shows that these parents don't care at all, or to implement this kind of thing, right? Meaning if opposition want to say that we can educate them or etc., we think current status quo already have these kind of things, and it doesn't work, unfortunately. But then we also see that shaming is just the only way for society to set their statement, right? And we think that it is good because in the process it could incite behavioral change, right? Because usually the reasons why humans shame other humans, it is just because we want to give our reaction as social animals when we see an outlier which didn't fit themselves correctly within the community. Well, this argumentation doesn't necessarily mean that all social norms are correct, but I think in the particular setting of this motion, which is parenting, we believe that everyone agrees that children well-being is important and this societal value is correct, right? And second, we also believe that this kind of shaming has been done before, and we think that we could accept it. For example, how we shame smokers who smoke in the public and harms others. But thirdly, I think that people will change their behavior when they are feel ashamed, right? Because they feel like an outcast, and they will try to fit better in the society because humans are social animals and we couldn't live detached from the society. Exactly because we think that parents don't want to be ashamed, they don't want to feel like an outcast, and also they want to do what is perceived as right by the community. They will change their parenting ways, right? They will start abandoning iPad parenting principles, and they will start to talk more to their children. And that's so we think that this is important because other ways have failed, and only shaming is the way for you to change the behavior of these parents we proudly propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech. Now calling on the leader of opposition to begin the clash. Hear, hear.
Hi, cool. Am I audible and visible?
Yes to both.
Lovely. My brother is an iPad kid, and I want to solve the problem too. The debate is not about whether Prop or Op agrees that iPad parenting is bad. It's about the mechanism of shaming. It's about how the rest of society, outside of iPad parenting, engages with the parents. Do we want shaming, or do we want a more consultative and reasonable approach that Op wants to ask for? Op will trade off things like slower receptivity or taking longer for the kid to wean off the iPad if we think that this causes less harm than Prop in the long term. Two substantives today and my characterization will be integrated. I want to also note that most of the material in PM can be completely negated because they talk about why iPad parenting is bad. We completely agree. First, on how it's not really the parents' fault. First up, I want to clarify that this debate is about parents who are well-intentioned and want to do the best for their kid. This is about a minority of parents. In fact, we want to characterize that in real life, there's more and more research and news coming out about how being an iPad parent and giving your kids iPads is bad. So some of the parents are starting to realize that they shouldn't do this. I'm going to frame our parents in a much more charitable way. If you listen to our speech, no. He says that parents are neglectful, irresponsible, and lazy. This is harmful for their own case because this means if these parents were really like this, they wouldn't be finding out information about how to take care about their kid the best. The social media posts and news articles that they talk about isn't going to be impacting these parents. And even if they did read this, they would think that they are justified. Yes, I'll take you now.
If it is true in your side that information regarding bad like iPad parenting already exists. That proves that just because information exists does not incentivize like these parents to change. That means
Yes, I know.
only
We are giving
shaming
the
can work.
mechanism on how to do this after this in the second sub. I know. Second, that we want to tell you that these parents are well-intentioned, and this is way more charitable because this means that parents on both sides that we can debate about are parents who are likely to change their behavior to act in a better way for the kid. If parents are well-intentioned, why then do they still give their kids iPads? 4 reasons. First, many parents think that tech familiarity is good for the kid. Older parents who are not familiar with tech think that it's very important to learn as a skill set. They want to surrender the learning process to the kids by giving them devices so that they familiarize themselves. Younger parents have been raised in an era where they see the development of tech with their own 2 eyes. They probably had their own tech experimentation phase where they use dumb phones or play Tamagotchi. They learn to navigate menus, they use this to learn computer skills. They want their kid to learn this too. That means that they are likely to be people who engage in parenting groups. They are likely to be people who speak to their friends and have the incentive to learn. It's also likely that on both sides, the mechanism of shaming / consultation or advice comes from these people. These parents will use iPad as a distraction then because they think that kids can learn from it. Second is that modern capitalism is necessarily expensive. We are debating about the vast majority of parents who are middle class and below. Most of them are working, where even no matter if they are double income households or single parents, they can't really hire a nanny. The comparative is that the iPad is a one-time cost that is way more affordable as a way to entertain their kid. Next is that how work demands a lot more higher commitments nowadays because it's an employer market and not many people can take significant time off their full-time jobs. On proposition, they provide a bad consequence to these parents by assuming that the parents are knowingly making this choice to give their kid the iPad while knowing that it is bad. I think this is principally unjust, even if you don't buy our second substantive later. We recognize that it's wrong to blame victims of circumstance already in real life. A parallel is, these people are either good intentioned or ignorant and they did not have the agency to commit harm. The parallel then is, for example, how some people who make mistakes, we are willing to forgive them even in the legal system, for example, manslaughter, because they did not intend to do so. Second, why it is likely to backfire on proposition. We'll tell you why shaming is unlikely to be a kind mechanism on their side. They can't say that shaming will be kind if they want immediate change or a large degree of pressure to be placed on these parents. 2 reasons. First, shaming means ostracization. This looks like when we shame body image or promiscuity like prostitution in real life, we reject people as a member of society. We use very harsh words to condemn their actions. But second, this debate is about children and their well-being. They are perceived to be the most vulnerable people in society. If Prop wants to frame that allowing their iPad kids to exist causes irreparable harm to the child that is comparable to child abuse, then society will have a very aggressive response in shaming because they inherently see the kids as people that deserve to be protected, yet they are neglected by their legal guardian. We tell you that this actually antagonizes parents, and this is bad in 2 ways. First, but why do they get antagonized? Because it's an attack on their identity as parent, it's an attack on their lived experience raising the kid. It's saying that you don't know how to take care of a kid, but even though this is their own kid that they know the best, it's an accusation that they don't love their kid. They will receive this in 2 ways. First, they'll be like, no, you're wrong, and they retreat further into their own bubble because they think that they are right. They isolate themselves from the support systems and sources of advice like their friends, like the social media articles and news articles. This is bad because parents need a lot of guidance, not just right now, but also in the future when their kid becomes rebellious, their kid stays out late at night, or makes other mistakes. Second, let's be charitable to Prop and assume that parents realize that they have made a grave mistake. It's time for me to snatch the iPad away. This accelerated response is likely to happen on Prop for 2 reasons. First, physiologically, people don't like being shouted at and criticized. They don't want to have that fear anymore. Second, if it were true that parents care about the way society perceives them, they will want to take away the thing that makes society criticize them as soon as possible. The parallel is just like when iPad kids see influencers living a certain way online, they want to fit eating prime and drinking prime and eating lunchly. They think this is ideal and they respond unhealthily and addictively. Why is this bad? We think that this results in 2 things. First is that the kid doesn't have any alternative source of entertainment to pacify them. And this is horrible because you now have children who feel resentful at their parents that have taken away their sole source of enjoyment. These are kids who become very disdainful of what their parents have led them to do. Second is that this translates to worse outcomes in the future. These are children who feel more abandoned by their parents, more likely to be rebellious, less trustful of their parents. They are less likely to tell them what are the challenges that happen in their life. They are more likely to bottle up their unhappiness and their happenings of bullying at school. There are less responses by adults to deal with the problems in their life. There's more ability for them to venture out their houses, be less contactable, and also be more likely to be engaged in social ills. These are the parents who feel ostracized and antagonized by their parents. These are also parents who are unjustly told that they are doing a bad job. For all those reasons, we must oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that speech. Now calling on the Deputy Prime Minister to explain the case coming from government. Here.
Check, am I audible and visible?
Yes to both.
Okay, can I just unmute? Starting in 3, 2, 1. I don't understand why the opposition will come and say that, oh, you should entertain your children, give them iPad and so on and so forth, and that is good for your children because they can learn, etc. While your responsibility as a parent, when your children are in like toddler stage, for example, is to give them motoric toys, for example, a physical motoric toys, so that you could trigger their motoric cycles function, for example, to be good as possible. I don't see why then this is a justification coming from opposition. Why then iPad kids are going to be why then iPad kids parents are not going to be shamed at the very first place, even if they did not give a shit about their children, for example. I don't see the reasoning why then at the end of the day children could learn everything without the control from parents, since the context slide said that this is an excessive use of screen time, which means that your parents would not have those much time to fully control your children and etc. Or this means as how then escapism from their parents, because they are very dizzy to see their toddlers using having an activities, for example. I don't see why then at the end of the day this become very important under the side of opposition when regarding to this kind of cases. Two extensions that I'm going to reframe what Alvin have already said. But under our side, what we will do is we will support how society will shame those parents, criticize those parents, and etc. Or how then if the algorithm could go to your grandparents, for example, to actually criticize your own parents simply because don't give them too much gadget or don't give them too much screen time and etc. We don't say that they cannot learn from gadget. I don't get the point. Why then at the end of the day it is automatically under our side those kids could not learn from iPad, or those kids could access internet. We say that we harm this because Alvin have already framed you. Why then this is an escapism from parents because they did not want to see their children do some activities that those children should be at their own stages, for example. I don't understand why the end of the day we are under our side there is no accessible to technology, or the accessibility of technology will be banned or will be not accessible at the end of the day. Therefore, opposition might lose at this debate. But now, extension. I will reframe the process of someone consent in order of marriage and consented in order of having children. And this is why the reasons are fundamental. Why then at the end of the day, we should shame the one who is, running from the responsibility as parents simply because they are consented to have children, and children doesn't have the option to consent or not consent to become a children or to choose their parents, right? When two people consented for marriage, this doesn't mean that they both consented to have children. There are several things that might be under the part of discussion, whether they are ready to have children or not. This means that throughout the processes, they have so much consideration and preparation to begin with. There are also incentives from government, for example, to protect those unready couples, such as providing condoms or other protections so that they did not have children when they are not ready, for example. But what did the couples do under both worlds? They decide to have children. They decide to have children. They decide to to be a perfect couple with one children, with one kids, and etc. That is what they have imagined at the very first place if they decided to have children to begin with. At first, they might love their children on the birth. This is the thought of process. So judge, please notice this. It's the sign of future generation when your young son or young daughter, your young son or young daughter birth into the world. This is the sign of two different families unite as one. But this is where things comes to a bad situation. When your children begin to grow as toddlers, they might be more explorative. There are like, psychoanalysis phases from Freud's theory, such as like, phallic phases or oral and anal phases. This is the important phases to have the role of parents to control their children. How then your parents would like be so dizzy enough to see your little child eating their finger, or like licking their fingers and etc., while they're touching like gross things and etc. This means that in order to escape from those kind of dizziness or those kind of business, which they might think that there are other important business, they try to use the eye gadget as escapism. That's what's going to happen, simply because at the end of the day, gadget is a controlling entities to like actually control their children or distract them to actually not doing those harmful activities taught by their parents. This means under their side, what will happen is that at first maybe there will be some variable controls or like some incentive to control their children to like make it not excessive. But at the end of the day, it might come to the to the thought of the parents that this is something that is very this is something that is very this is satisfying when at the end of the day your children are not doing like hyperactivity things that might make you dizzy and etc. Okay, POI, go ahead.
We completely agree that parents have a duty of care. You need to respond to us saying that shaming is the worst mechanism possible.
Shaming is not the worst mechanism possible, simply because under our side, under both sides, there are no exception rather than to shame those parents who have already been trapped inside of the joiners while distracting their children. Simply because that is the point where they didn't realize. Okay, so just let me continue. Let me continue. At first, when you give them like gadgets, you might be like controlling them and etc. But when you find the joy of like your children are not being as what child should be, you might be feeling, oh, this is good, I should just give them iPad and etc. They could access Cocomelon and etc. without knowing or controlling at the very first place, simply because they wouldn't care anyway, simply because they have they have put all of their trust of parents to like to the iPad and etc., which means that the trust are transforming from parents from children trusting parents to children trusting those iPad at the end of the day. This is very harmful. But this is what is the most important thing. At the phallic phases, this is where children reaches its very first libido phases, reaches their very first sexual orientation or sexual sexual lust, for example. Simply this is the moment where parents should have those like roles to like cater those children. But when at the end of the day, their parents did not really give a shit about their children and just put it all those obligations towards the gadgets, means like the accessibility of children, how then children would like find those coping mechanism because they didn't get what they deserve from their parents, like those parenting when they are in phallic phases and like they have like uncontrolled libido, for example, means that they're going to find those mechanism or alternative from internet because they have the use of excessive and they understand internet already, which means this is going to be very harmful under their side. So we will we will lovely to shame those parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. Now calling on the Deputy Leader of Opposition to then extend on the case of opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I clearly audible and visible?
Hello. Yes to both.
All right, amazing. I'll start in a moment. The largest failure of the proposition case is the failure to engage with the core of our mechanisms. Throughout this entire match, we clearly tell you that iPad children are bad. But what's worse and what's likely to proliferate iPad children are to shame the iPad parents rather than giving them tangible solutions and some sense of empathy over their struggles. Two questions then. Firstly, is shaming effective? And secondly, is shaming just? Firstly, is shaming effective? I'm going to firstly recharacterize and re-explain the nature of shaming and what the reaction to shaming is likely to be. Proposition claims that as a result of shaming, parents are likely to instantaneously correct their behavior and be incredibly receptive to this. This is untrue. Because as what Edmund told you, shaming in this case is incredibly aggressive. It's telling you that you as a parent who cares about your children actually doesn't. That you are an abuser who doesn't give a damn about the person you've spent the last decades of your life raising. We think this is likely to be an assault on their identity, that rather than making them receptive, forces them to actually hide back and move away from the rest of their community because they see themselves as being highly ostracized. I want to tell you why this is incredibly harmful for two reasons. Firstly, this negates the impact of shaming at all, because if the true outcome of their first speaker's case exists, which is that parents are excluded from society and the community, they are unlikely to be able to do things like actually wane off the iPads or take receptive advice. But secondly, it's also likely to have them be excluded from these parenting communities in the long run. I'll take you in a moment. This is incredibly harmful because parenting is a long-term issue. So the moment you alienate them in the short term, it's likely to have long-term knock-on effects. I'm going to tell you why they are more likely to actually react and exclude themselves rather than just bend over and capitulate. This is because parents crucially believe that they know their best and have been doing their best for their children. We're talking about parents who presumably care about their children and have been doing what they've been doing. So if their efforts have been completely undermined, they know for themselves that they are trying. As a result, they are not likely to be receptive and likely to hide away rather than actually take this advice charitably. I'll take your point now.
So by your LO's identification, are parents well-intentioned to their children and are they capable of critical thought?
Yes, we believe that parents are well-intentioned in terms of helping their children. Presumably, if a parent didn't give a damn, they wouldn't be affected on either side's case. We think that crucially a parent who cares is incredibly willing to listen to advice for the reason I'm going to explain now, which is our comparative given in Edmund's second substantive. I'm going to once again explain how parenting works here, because proposition claims that it's just the parent and society. I think this is very wrong. I think it's pretty intuitive to buy that many parents ask others, for instance, their own parents, their friends who have children, or even parenting guides on how to actually be parents, because they lack experience and they are probably inclined to confide in community. We think that our mechanism is better, because when you actually are sympathetically presenting information through the community, it's going to be likely to be taken far more receptively rather than you simply being yelled at and being called a terrible parent by strangers on the internet who have no idea who you are, or worse still, betrayed by people who you should actually care about you. I'm going to tell you why their characterization of status quo and them saying that what we're doing is ineffective is untrue. This is because of the recency of the iPad kids phenomenon. This is a current issue that's having ongoing research and incredibly modern effects. This means, therefore, that the vast majority of parents who are actually able to give advice on this themselves also only recently learned of this information and recently know why it's bad. And that there are probably other parents who, as a result of being old and not understanding the internet, or they themselves having been raised on the internet, are probably ignorant. These are incredibly important structural reasons given in Edmund that haven't exactly been responded to by proposition. I think this is incredibly important, and this comparative mechanism is likely to receive a far greater degree of buy-in simply because it doesn't attack the parent and that the advice is coming from people who are more reliable and more trustworthy. I'm also going to tell you why the nature of this advice is better. The nature of this advice isn't going to look like an expedient rush to have the kid go cold turkey. I'm going to explain why. Because fear is an inherently expedient mechanism, since you want to quickly reintegrate yourself into society, taking proposition at their absolute best case. If this is the case here, we think that they are likely to just snatch the kid's iPad away. I'm going to tell you why this is incredibly bad. And this is responsive to their first substantive. I think that snatching the kid's iPad away is incredibly bad for a few reasons. Firstly, contextually and structurally, these iPad children, assuming they are actually iPad children, have had some degree of dependence on the iPad. For instance, adoration of a certain online idol or internet addiction. We think, therefore, forcing them to go cold turkey with no alternatives is incredibly harmful. It's likely to do things like, for instance, create distress for the child, create antagonism against the parent, undercutting their side's analysis about how it's actually going to improve parental relationships. And thirdly, it's likely to actually traumatize the child even more if what their side claims of the internet or the iPad being an escape mechanism is true. We think that on our side, by speaking to parents and consuming information rather than feeling the rush to be accepted, it's a lot better. Because you're likely to do things like hear out long stories from your parents or long stories from peers about how you are able to actually ease the kid off of the iPad in the long run. We think this is harmful. Firstly, it's probably more realistic because you're easing off the kids' access to the internet. You probably can't make a kid go completely cold turkey. But secondly, it's less likely to elicit spite or rebellion because instead of the kid having just either yelling at you, throwing a tantrum, or worse still, going behind your back to use the iPad, you're going to slowly introduce new things that the kid can learn. We think this slower, more drawn out method is far more beneficial for the kid and the parent-child relationship in the long term. I'm now going to move on to my second question then is this shaming just? I think this is also another independent pathway to victory that this side hasn't exactly engaged with. Because both sides crucially agree that we're probably debating parents who to some degree care about their child. This is incredibly problematic because their side claims that these parents are willfully harming their children. We think that on this characterization, they simply can't say this because the parent probably wants to do things like spend time with their child. What we're telling you now is that they cannot. For the parents who have absolutely no choice but to raise iPad children, they are doing so because they are that single mother who has no other alternative other than to actually have things like go and find food, or these parents may otherwise be ignorant due to the circumstances they've been brought up under. We think this is incredibly unjust and tantamount to shaming someone who's pregnant for being a slut rather than being in a bad situation. Oppose.
Thank you, DLO, for that speech. Now calling on the government whip to crystallize the case coming from government. Here.
Am I audible and visible?
Hello, yes to both.
Okay, cool. Um, right. Hopefully I'm still stable because it's raining outside. So if I disconnected, just let me know. Taking one at 5 from up. Unmute, I'll try. No promises. Pronunciation. Going to begin on my first word. It was roughly 18 years to the day when my father would come to my house in South Jakarta bringing this rather peculiar box with a title called PS1 on the side. He would give me and say that because I've never been given such privileges by my father because I was the last of his, offsprings, I would like to give this to you because this, in a sense, I would later find out is the means for which he would want to heal. But moreover than that, at the time, a means for him to give me some level of affection. What he did not understand later on is that at the time, because of his obligations to other things, sure, maybe he has some justification to do this because he cannot focus on myself alone. But this trait does not escape him as he grow older. He would still give me certain gifts as a means to circumvent affection and genuine relational development between me and him. And for that reason, that establishes the divide between me and him that carries over into my adult life to the sense that I detach myself fully from him as an individual. I think the case coming from Proposition 6 answers two claims. One, why the alternative under status quo simply is insufficient, which you can see in Alvin's speech. Second, to the degree of harm of how those development of relationship would probably manifest, see Rakan's speech on that. I'm going to structure my speech then on the issues that do matter. First, on parents themselves. I think to the degree, what I would like to emphasize firstly is on the idea of the justification and opposition. Because they tell you that, oh, these parents need some circumvention because to the degree they are obligated by jobs, they are obligated by their own interests, for example, or so on and so forth. We think that when two individuals consensually agree to engage in an act of marriage and by extension an act of intercourse and by extension an act of harboring a children, then there is a degree of culpability when they are unable to fulfill those obligations for which they already consented. See Alvin's speech in regards to this. This is important because this destroys the entirety of why necessarily parents are absolved of the kinds of, criticism that they have to harbor and they have to take. But moreover than that, what I want to clarify is that firstly, they misconstrue our stance. Sure, shaming is unkind. That's literally the point. Because the idea of having information, other parents telling me that, oh, it's okay because you have jobs, therefore you cannot obligate your own self to the, like emotional needs and necessities of your children, means that inherently these people or these individuals are insulated from the kinds of process that prerequisite change and prerequisite critical thought to understand that what they're doing right now, when they excessively give time and isolation to their children with these gadgets, would manifest on a sense of detachment that would later be, harmful for the degree of relationship that you would want to have. But I think moreover than that, that also proves why specifically shaming becomes the last resort for how you fix
information.
No, I'll take at 5. This becomes the particular issue for why then the only means of solvency for you to get is precisely to shaming. The only extent that you can credit Alvin's speech, don't take the straw man, is because Alvin only specifies that shaming inherently, and the explicit understanding is that you criticize them and you demand corrective actions from them. That's not to say that suddenly, because you criticize these parents, they would become alienated as per the identification in opposition. This is simply a logical leap for which then they've never given to you a clarification why that is justified to begin with. But I think moreover, what you can at least substantiate is that the means of these, criticism is indeed justified. At the point in time, the alternative does not work. But also, secondly, this probably manifests specifically on the kinds of exchange or output that we both want, as in to say that better parenting and etc. Precisely because Alvin already told you that there are constructs like ego and pride that is correlated to shame and guilt when you face social criticism. Thus, therefore, there is an increased incentive on self-preservation and protectionism because you want to preserve these kinds of relationship. So the degree of likelihood for you to correct your, wrongdoing in this particular regard is far higher when you introduce shaming to begin with. We think this is acceptable. We don't think necessarily it is that harmful. I think secondly, on the children themselves, this is something that they've never given to you. They try to impose that it is unjust for parents to be burdened by this sense of accountability. I think I've already engaged with that, with the premise that I've given to you. That moreover than that, what I want to expand is that if it is unjust for the parents to be demanded liability upon, it is also unjust to give children or expose them to processes that directly traumatize them, that directly limits their sense of necessity for connection. This is why a lot of the times, a lot of children feels isolated. They develop schizoid personality disorders and traits where they feel lonely, but they feel as if no one understands them because the first figure that should be trusted obligation never is given the liability or the incentive to care anyway, because there is a sense that, because they work, because they get money, therefore it is absolved upon them to care for these children emotionally. That's how you manifest detachment. That's how you then increases the likelihood for tension, conflict, and sense of detachment when these kids becomes adult. And this also manifests back to the parents themselves. Because a lot of the time, in current status quo, the reason why the parents themselves are specifically endangered now, especially in regards to old age isolation, etc., is because they manifest this process to begin with. A lot of the time, the issue that old parents have is because they don't feel catered to by their children. The reason for this is precisely the analysis that I've given to you, that this, process of excessive iPad parenting, when it is not corrected, even if harshly so, would manifest to that kind of degree. So there is greater level of impact harmfully on their end when there is no proper check and balance and criticism that can be inducted. I think lastly, in terms of responses, they say that, these parents are well-intentioned and well-meaning. They probably are capable of critical thought. I think to the degree that if it is true, and this is the LO's literal definition, right? I don't think the LO and WIP can then challenge that because that's necessarily something that we knew that would directly case in another way. If that is true, then they would be open to criticisms because inherently they know that there is an underlying interest for why people criticize them as such. There is a greater degree of opt-in and a willingness to at least put intention to correct because inherently they are capable of doing so because they are well-intentioned, precisely like LO said, that they do have the interests of these children in mind. We don't think necessarily shaming is to be, villainized. I think for the most part, we are very proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech, Government Whip. Now calling on the Opposition Whip to crystallize the case coming from up. Here, here.
Hi, can I be seen and heard?
Yep.
Okay, I'll take my POIs by voice, so just unmute and ask. Thanks. The experience of being a parent, to those both new and old, is incredibly unknowable. It is unknowable both to you and I, the conditions under which you exist, and how those environments will change in the future. So the most pertinent question to ask is not, is having an iPad a bad or good thing for a child? It is, do the environment and circumstances under which the various actors in this debate function lead their mechanism of shaming, to which we've heard shockingly little defense, stand up to the claims they want to make? Two clashes, therefore. Firstly, on parents' reasons. Secondly, on parents' response. Firstly, on parents' reasons. Their claim at the core of this debate is that parents bear a certain duty of care. This is unresponsive to the manner in which circumstances may change beyond the initial onset of having that child, which parents do not consent into. But even if you don't buy that, at no point do they prove the underlying subterranean premise of this principal argument. That is, that parents bear a degree of culpability. Let's use Government Whip's own example about his father. Given his father giving the gift of an iPad to him as a sign of affection, it is incredibly strange to subsequently say that his father is therefore a bad parent, because we recognize that parents here are a victim of circumstance in a variety of ways. The first is because of economic needs. The fact that the vast majority of parents who can even afford to have an iPad kid either both work or they live in single-parent households that's increasingly common and do not have the physical capacity to spend more and more time with their child. This leads, therefore, to them giving them the iPad, because even when they are at work, at least someone will be there to be with their child, videos that their child can watch, access to communities online that they can interact with. They do not want their child to be alone. So the act of giving them the iPad is in the vast majority of cases an altruistic one. We also think it often derives out of societal perceptions, precisely what they talk about via affection, because it's wider society that says that this is something that presumably is desirable. The fact that you as a parent may have grown up seeing the development of technology and do not want your child to be left behind, all of which are societal bits of information, not an autonomous decision by parents. So do parents know the information about whether an iPad is good or not? The answer at this point in time is no. We explain why the counterfactual is far more likely to improve. Parents care about their kids. Even if you don't buy that immediate statement, I suspect that if you touch your heart, you recognize that the additional time parents want to spend, all the things that proposition talk about parents wanting to see their child grow up or their child wanting to disconnect from them, are things the average parent do not want. So in the cases where you recognize this to gradually improve, or information about why iPads might be harmful to children to relatively come to light in the status quo, then that is when parents naturally organically change. I know what they will say. This in and of itself is unresponsive to their claims about why their mechanism works. I'll get to that later. But the important thing to note here is the characterization of parents as relatively altruistic and caring about their kids suggests that information will be deemed correctly. They say that iPad kids are already happening, and this is the extent of their response to our mechanism. I would ask you a simple question. Are iPad kids currently still kids? Yes. And that suggests that the mechanism or the societal situation of having iPad kids is a relatively recent thing, unless your perception of an iPad kid is some 25-year-old in his mother's basement. I don't think that is what the counterfactual is. The fact is that this is an incredibly recent thing. So information that parents currently do not have access to will gradually increase over time. Secondly, what about parents' response? We were incredibly charitable in providing a spectrum of potential responses here. We explained that the most likely initial response is one of rejection, and this takes them at their very best. Even if parents are incredibly altruistic, then the specific manner in which information is afforded to them via things like shaming is explicitly antagonistic. Government whip says, while this can just be open, they love their kids, so they'll be open to criticisms. But this isn't criticism, because criticism can be conducive. But in your own speech, you explain why your mechanism must explicitly be unkind, which leads to a fundamental assault on what they perceive to be identity. Because they think that they are decent parents, but you tell them that you are not just a bad parent, you are a bad person for performing in this way. This means an active rejection of the circles that give them these bits of information. But the second is, even in the cases where they do accept this information, it is likely to be incredibly drastic. Given the extent of the responsibility they are now given, i.e., you tell them that you need to read this benefit and outcome in a very drastic way via shaming, and this again takes them at their very best if the mechanism they say, i.e., wanting to fit into your society, is so valuable to them, then immediate rejection from that society on the grounds and via the mechanism of shaming leads to a drastic response. What does this look like? It looks like actively taking away the iPad near immediately. It means segregating your child from the technological world. The problem here is that the problem is twofold. The first is this hurts a child insofar as they've already developed these habits because they view their parent as being someone that they ought rebel against. But the second is that the societal manner in which this phenomenon occurs is at no point proven by this government bench to be symmetric. So in individual cases of this happening, that is when your child feels more isolated than ever. That is when issues they want to talk about, like your child seeking escapism or detaching from their family, become far more likely. Before I move on, I'll take the point.
We have proven to you that even with the current existence of educational platforms, etc., parents are not changing their ways. How will they change on your side then?
Proving and stating are different things, both semantically and in the context of debate. We point out that the vast majority of psychological analysis within this debate points to parents responding to your mechanism, at best, in an ineffective way. Even if you take us at our very worst and suggest that existing educational platforms are ineffective, I would suggest existing levels of ignorance are probably better than the levels of rebellion and rejection on the side of proposition. So even at our very worst, I think we weigh over them by proving that their vote is just worse. So by like UADC rulebook, this works. Why is this beneficial at the end of this debate? We prove simple things, that parents recognize the harm that might occur to their child, or the fact that giving them an iPad is just generally a rational thing afforded to their child given the circumstances they exist in. As a result, all of the benefits that Proposition 1 to claim down the bench do not accrue because they rest on unexplained mischaracterizations of what exactly parents are, where their incentives will lie, and as a result, what their responses will be to their mechanism. The core of this debate was never about iPad children. It was about telling your vulnerable parents, individuals who care for the children they have raised, that they are fundamentally wrong, that they are bad people, and for all these reasons, incredibly proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech, Opposition Whip. Now calling on the op reply. You may begin your speech. Here.
Hi, just checking that the mic is still good.
Yep, they're all still good.
All right, amazing. Stories like Gov Whips are very touching and very true. It is an issue that many parents and children do indeed face. The question we're asking here on opposition isn't, are iPad kids good? Obviously, the answer is no. What we're asking is which solution is better. And I think this is the core crux of opposition's win, because proposition hasn't dealt with our mechanism and our comparative arguments. I want to deal with two mechanisms of housekeeping. Firstly, I think proposition arguments that iPad children are bad just don't hold any water, because we presumably agree that iPad children are bad. All we're saying is that their way of resolving the issue is utterly ineffective. Secondly, they say that existing education is incredibly ineffective. I want to point out that from the very beginning in LO, down the bench in Deputy and Whip, we've clearly told you that firstly, that more charitably speaking, this is a pretty new phenomenon. It hasn't had enough time for word to get around yet, and that parenting circles are actually trying their best to do this currently. They are simply individuals that are cut off from this information because of their incredibly busy lives or ignorance very well. Secondly, they don't contend even on their absolute best case with our mechanisms of why proving that there'll be more backlash and it'll be counterproductive. So I don't think that this dismissal of status quo is effective at all. I'm going to ask two simple questions. Firstly, is it effective? And secondly, is it just? On effectiveness, two subpoints. Firstly, are parents, which sides which side's mechanism is better for parents? Secondly, which side's is better for children? Firstly, on the parents. Their side claims that shaming is incredibly effective in getting parents to change their mind. We tell you this is untrue. Because from the very beginning in leader and in deputy, we clearly tell you that most parents value the perception of themselves as somebody who cares deeply for their child, that their existence in the parenting community exists as a fellow person who cares for their child. Therefore, they haven't responded to our arguments that when you tear away that when society calls you a bad parent, you are more likely to disengage with society due to how they undermine your very identity and dignity as a member of that social group. You are unlikely to engage with a society that is seen to utterly hate you. Secondly, we tell you that this is an unproductive mechanism because from the very beginning, we've told you that shaming is more about hate than it is about answers. We've clearly told you that the base mechanism of shaming is fear. I've mentioned in my speech that this fear mechanism is incredibly bad because it results in rushed, short-termist solutions that don't require actual engagement or understanding. I've also later told you why this counterfactual is a lot better. Because we've told you that people are far more interested in listening to their fellow parents or to their own parents or their peers. Their peers' advice is a lot more effective because it actually offers long-term solutions, stories, and shared experiences on how to ease that child off, rather than simply listening to society scream at you. Secondly, the children. I think the comparative is very simple. On proposition, you rip that kid's iPad away, the kid is more likely to resent you, go behind your back, and diminish that parent-child relationship, as well as their capacity to actually move on. On our side, it's very simple. You ease that kid off. It's far more realistic. It gets that kid to actually learn how to do other things, and it doesn't make you hate your parents. We think this comparative is proven and is far better on our side. Lastly, then, on the principal contention, is it necessarily just? We've given two broad lines of argument that have gone unengaged with. Firstly, and most charitably, their side claims that you consent into having a child. This is unresponsive because in Edmund and Donovan, we've clearly told you that due to things like the economic volatility of the modern world or modern capitalism, that circumstances change, and that even in the best case, things like economic turmoil or personal tragedy still exist. But I think the core mechanism they haven't dealt with is the idea of good intentions. Because parents do care, and we think it's incredibly harmful to shame and call someone an asshole simply because they didn't know better.
Thank you for that speech. Op reply now to end the debate, calling on government reply. Here.
All right, checking if I'm audible.
Yes,
Hello?
you are.
All right, cool. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This motion is a support motion. We think the evaluation is simply whether the object, i.e. shaming parents who did parenting, is justified, right? Hence, here comes like 4 observations. Her observation that when they say that they want their children to learn, let's just assume this is true then. But notice this is not something exclusive on op, right? On our side, we have proven to you that children could still learn through toys or even iPad. The difference is that it will not be excessive in our side, and parents should balance it with direct parenting as well. But second, they also say that parents are pressured by capitalism and economic needs. 2 things. I think 1, we think this is a fallacy to use structural problems as a justification for gross negligence like this. Judges, as a community that prides ourselves in reasoning and moral righteousness, we believe that everyone agrees that 2 wrongs don't make a right. But second, we think that the number of parents who are truly forced to the point of no choice since they are working 3 jobs, for example, are very small within the population, right? But this debate talks about nearly the whole demographic of parents who do this kind of parentings, and note that in majority, we have proven to you they do this out of convenience in our first speaker analysis on pre-existing mechanisms which opt try to not engage at all. We sympathize with those who are in a pinch, but we believe society will also shame conditionally because it is just uncharitable for opt to assume that the shaming will be similar in degree across all situational contexts, because society also can empathize with this extreme minority of parents who are in extremely bad economic condition, right? This debate doesn't happen in vacuum, and society also have other norms and values to weigh what kind of reaction is suitable and whether the shaming should be very harsh or not, right? But then third observation then, on the harms on the children. We have proven to you the big degree of harm, right? But this is important because children is vulnerable actor here. So even if you want to take into account about parents as object to champion, children should be prioritized in this debate. But second, our second speaker also have proven to you that it is crucial for parents to be present during the childhood phase. And changing this with excessive use of iPad will deny these children something very crucial for their growth. And we see no substantial challenges to this analysis coming from opposition. But then fourth observation then, we think that shaming incites behavioral changes, right? And look that they didn't deny this, by the way. And also, we believe that this will succeed because our first speaker has proven to you that as social creators, we care about other people's opinion, especially when they have shamed you as a way to condemn your wrongdoings. Note though, this is not something so harmful as DLO tried to frame, because we believe they are very uncharitable to assume that society is irrational, because on their side, shaming of parents is put in the same level as how society might fully cut off a sexual predator, right? Which we believe is not likely, right? Parents are shamed, true, but the degree won't be as harsh to the point you are fully isolated, as our third speaker has proven to you as well. But also, I think if you are not accepting of being ashamed and instead go against society, my question is, are you even sane as a human? We believe generally normal humans will reflect when the society condemns them instead of trying to fight back and feel like their identity is violated and the society or the world is against them, right? This is very, very psychotic. But then lastly, our second speaker also have proven to you that sense that these parents should be shamed in order for them to change, because parents who has used this parenting already feel the net benefit for themselves. When their children didn't bother them anymore, they feel the joy and peace, which is very selfish. And you need an external factor to counterbalance this internal thoughts process parents have, and shaming is the way to get into their mind. But then, yeah, I just want to question opposition regarding their analysis on the behavioral change, right? We believe OP is very uncharitable if they frame that these parents will be very uneducated and just suddenly snatch the iPad from the children on our side. If OP wants to say parents on their side are educated and can be rational in their conduct, then why on our side they will be very uneducated and just snatch the iPad without consideration, right? We believe they will use the best way to shift their parenting style, because on both sides, parents care about their children. It's just that in current status quo, many did it in the wrong way. Lastly, I just want to question also, if they concede this is bad parenting and our way might not work, then the question is, what is the solution on OP? So far, I see opposition, they try to stick to the current status quo, where we have seen no real changes we proudly propose.
Thank you, government reply. And that concludes the Novice Grand Finals for Intertext Pre-UADC. Give your